Hello everyone and welcome to this week's ExtendScript tutorial. In this one I'm going to show you how to make an expression locker for After Effects. Essentially what the script will allow you to do is save, store, and then apply in the future expressions from your layers. It also allows you to use custom names, and as you can see here it says wiggle me or sample expression, and it will display the actual expression text below. And then there's also two buttons, the first of which will allow you to save expressions. So if I have this new wiggle expression here, I can click on save and call this maybe wiggle2. And now if I select wiggle2 in the UI, it's going to appear. So not only will it allow you to save expressions, we can also take a previous expression and say apply it to another layer. There may be some conflicts, of course, if you don't have enough dimensions or too many dimensions. In this case, it's a bit of a problem with the scale, but we can apply this previous expression from our locker onto as many of these properties as we want. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start up this script and write it from scratch. We're going to basically be making a simple UI to contain everything here, and then a function to save it into a format that we can later read and apply back onto expressions. So we'll go ahead and load up a new JavaScript file, and we'll start off by coding the UI. Create a variable called main window and set this equal to a new window. It's going to be a palette type window, and we're just going to call it expression locker. And then it will be an undefined size. And then because we want everything to go from top to bottom, we're going to go ahead and set the orientation to column. So I'll take main window.orientation and set it equal to a column. Then I'm going to create a group to contain both this dropdown and display text. So I'll just say group1 is equal to our main window. And we're going to add a group with undefined size and dimensions. And we're going to call it group1. And then we want the elements to go from top to bottom, so we're also going to set the orientation here to column. So I'll say group1.orientation is equal to column. And now we need to add the two elements. The first one is just going to be a dropdown, and since it's the only one, I'll just call it DD for now. We don't need to be as specific if we just have one type of the element. So our dropdown is going to be equal to our group1, and we're going to add an item called a dropdown list. Undefined size dimensions for now, and then we're going to have an expression array that we're going to apply, and that's going to display all of these names like sample expression, wiggle me, etc. And then we're going to take the drop down and set the selection equal to 0, so it's selected the first element inside of it. After that, we need to make a text element, so I'll say display text is equal to our group1, and I'm going to add some static text, undefined size, and we're going to have a variable called expression text, which we're going to fill in a little bit. We're also going to want to set these to have a bigger size because by default they're going to be pretty small. So for the drop down, I'm going to say the size should be something like 220 by 25. And for the display text, we want quite a bit of space. So I'll say display text dot size is going to need to be equal to something maybe a little bit bigger, like 300 by 100. And also, we want it to be multi-line, and by default, any static text in your script UI is going to be single-line text. So a way we can get around this is by adding a fourth argument to our static text addition here, and inside of brackets, we're going to say multi-line, and then the colon is true. This will allow it to be multiple lines long. And then we need to make a group2 for our buttons, so we'll add that to our main window. And undefined size and call it group2. The orientation of group2 is going to be from left to right, so we'll set that equal to a row, and then we need a save button and an apply button. So we'll have our save button is equal to group2, and we'll add a button, and of course it's going to be called save, and then I'll just duplicate this and change this to apply and change this text as well. Alright, now we can go ahead and grab our main window, center it in the middle of the screen, and then grab our main window again and show it. Now when we run it, we're going to get an error because our array is empty, so let's just go ahead and fill this in with empty variables for now. And you can see our bare UI is going to look like this, which I think should be good, should be enough room to display everything in here and in the display as well. So now that what's left to do is go ahead and look at how we're going to save these expressions and then retrieve them later. What we're going to do is create a custom file. It can be whatever extension you want. I just called it .pref. It can be any combination of characters you want it to be and make custom file types in that way. And it's just going to contain JSON data. Essentially what it's going to do is inside of the file, it's going to contain the name of the expression and then the actual expression text. and it's just an array full of those. So we can easily loop through this data and then get all of the information, and if, say, they have a different one selected, use that index of the dropdown they've selected to then get the different expressions. So what we'll do is we'll create a file upon running the script if it doesn't exist, and it's going to contain just a sample expression so we can fill in some data. So before we ever create our UI, what I'm going to do is create a variable called expression file, and this is going to be equal to a file, and we're just going to put it on the desktop, and we'll call this expressions.pref. And then what we're going to do, we're going to say if this expression file does not exist, so we'll say if expression file.exists with the exclamation point, we need to create the file. In order to create the file, I'm going to grab my expression file and open it to write to it, and then we're also going to need to close it after that, make sure it doesn't have any leakage, and then we're going to need to write something into our file. So I'll say expression file.write, and now we need some kind of object or JSON object to put into this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the embedded JSON code here, just so I don't have to include it in the script. It does add a lot of space, so I'll just turn off word wrap so we can't see it. And now we have JSON abilities inside of our script, just embedded. We're now going to create an expression object to contain all of the expression names and text, as well as an expression array, which we will need to put inside of our dropdown. So before our expression file creation, we're going to create an expression array and make sure it's empty. And we're also going to have an expression object, which will start off by creating an empty one, and then we're going to have a sample expression. So we'll just say sample expression colon time times 500, a nice simple expression. And let's actually add 2. We'll have sample expression 2, and this will be like a wiggle. And now our object has 2 expressions inside of it. We just need to kind of format it and then put it into the file. So the easy way to do this now that we have JSON is to go down to where we're writing inside of our expression file, and we're going to say json.stringify, and the stringify will convert any object you give it, a JSON proper object, into a string, which will automatically format it like this. So I'll just go ahead and paste our expression object in there. So now if the file does not exist, it's going to create this expressions.pref file, and then it's going to write this object full of our sample expressions to it. And in fact, we should be able to test this right now. If I go ahead and delete this file, run the script, there's now an expressions.pref file on my desktop, and you can see it has the sample expression 1 with its text and the sample expression 2 with its text. So we've taken that object, stringified it using the JSON method, and that puts it into the file for us if it wasn't already created. In the other case, else, if the file is already existed, if it's already been created and has a bunch of presets in it, what we essentially need to do is go ahead and read it. So I'm going to say expression file.open for reading, and of course we're going to need to close it later, so we'll say close. And then we're going to grab our expression object, and we're going to set that equal to our expression file.read, and what we need to also do is say json.parse. JSON.parse is the opposite of stringify. If I read this whole file and I say parse this into an object, it's going to convert it backwards into this object here. So it's just basically a nice easy way to use JSON to convert it from a text into an object and back and forth. So if the file doesn't exist, it's going to create a new file with our sample expressions, and if the file already exists, it's going to read the file and set up our object otherwise. And then we need to fill in our expression array so that we have a list of the names. Remember, we need this dropdown to be full of sample expression 1 and sample expression 2 rather than this text here. So the way we're going to do that is just run a for loop on the initiation of the script. We're going to say var k in our expression object. This is how you loop through an expression, and each time we go through, k is going to be equal to the name of the property. So the first time through it's going to give us sample expression 1, the second time through it's going to give us sample expression 2. So k is really equal to the text of this property, and if then I called expression object k, it would then give me the value or the text for this expression. So what we're going to do is grab our expression array and push. Each time we're just going to grab k, which is the name. So now if we go ahead and run our script, you can see we now have populated our dropdown based on our file. So we have our sample expression 1 and 2, and we just need to get the display text now, which will display the expression text. And since we now have an empty string, there's nothing in here, what we can do is grab our expression object, and I'm going to grab our expression array, the 0th index, which is essentially the one that it is default. It selects the 0 one, which is our sample, and we're going to take that text, and we should get the value now. So now you can see it's going to display from that array the value of that expression, which is our sample expression. But if we change the dropdown, you can see the display text doesn't do anything. So let's add a listener so that when we say dd.onChange, it's going to be equal to an anonymous function. And inside of that function, we're just going to call our display text, and we're going to set the text to be something else. And what I'm going to do is copy this bit of code here, where we grab our object. We're going to set the display text equal to our expression object, and we're going to use the expression array to look at all the properties that are in it. But instead of just calling the 0 one, which is the default selection, what we're going to do is call the index of our selection. So what we can do is grab our dd.selection.index. So whenever they change the dd, it's going to use the index of what they've selected to change the text. So basically now if we run it and select a new expression, it's going to update the display text for us automatically. So that's all the complicated UI stuff that needed to be done. Now we can program a more simple part, which is saving the expression and then applying it. So first we're going to do the save. So I'm going to grab my save button and say onClick, set that equal to an anonymous function. And I'll also just duplicate that and do it for my apply button as well. And then we're going to need to set up a few checks. We need to make sure that the user has a composition selected, a layer selected, a property selected, and a property that has an expression when they click the save button. The reason for this is it will throw an error and give us issues if we don't. So we need to make sure all of these things before we can actually save the expression. So what we'll do is we'll start off with an if statement and we'll make our way down. The first if statement is going to check if they have a comp selected. The way we do that is by asking if app.project.item is equal to null, or if the opposite of app.project.activeItem is an instance of a comp item, then we want to tell the user, please select the composition. So this is going to ask if the active item is null, then it's probably not a comp, and if it's not an instance of a comp item, it's not a comp. And then we need to check if the layers are selected. So we need to have at least one layer selected, and in fact, let's make it to only be one layer. You can only select one layer and have, say, select the scale to save. So we'll go ahead and copy this code here, and we'll just trim it a little bit, and instead of app.project.activeItem, I'll say .selectedLayers.length does not equal 1. So we're going to say if app.project.activeItem.selectedLayers.length does not equal 1, if they don't have one layer selected, we'll say please select one layer. Alright, so now that we've checked that they've had a layer selected, we need to make sure they have one property selected for that layer as well. So in order to do that, we're going to add on here by saying we're going to grab our 0th selected layer, the one they have selected. We're going to say .selectedProperties.length does not equal 1. If they don't have one property selected, then they need to select one. So we'll say please select one property on your layer. And then lastly, we need to make sure that property they have selected has a real expression. If they have an empty expression with no text in it, it will give us expression enabled equals false. And likewise, if they haven't applied any expressions, that will give us false as well. So what we're going to do is say .selectedProperties0, the only selected property they have. If .expressionEnabled is equal to false, then they need to select something with a proper expression. So we'll say please select one valid expression. So now just to test this out, we'll go ahead and run the script and try and save some things. First I'll have nothing selected, and it will tell me to please select a composition. So I'll select my comp, press save. Now I need to select one layer. So I'll select my one layer. Now I need to select one property on my layer. So I'll select scale. but scale doesn't have a valid expression. So we can go ahead and apply a valid expression like wiggle, and now it should not give us any error when we click on save. So these are just a couple of the things we need to check before we save our expression. We need a name to display here, like sample expression, so we're going to give them a prompt first thing. So I'll create a variable called new name, and underneath I'm going to say new name is equal to a prompt. Now prompts will go ahead and give us these arguments here. First we need the prompt text. We'll say please select an expression name. The default is the default text it displays. I'll just say expression name. And then the title is the title that goes at the top of the window. We'll just say expression prompt. And then we're going to make sure that they inputted something. If they hit cancel, that means new name is going to be null because it's just a null variable right here. But if they input something in this prompt, we know that it's valid. So if new name is a valid thing, this is where we're going to save our expression. If they don't have anything in new name, then nothing's going to happen. So if we run this, click on a valid expression, hit save, we're now going to get this prompt window where we can type in our expression name. And now when we hit OK, it's going to go through this code here. If you hit cancel, it's not going to do anything. So in order to add this new expression to our object, we're going to grab our expression object, and to create a new property, we just need to put brackets after it and give it the text. The text for the new name is called new name because we have a variable for it now. So the new property name is going to be whatever the user gives it, and we're going to set the value to that to be whatever their expression is. So we need to go back up here and grab our selected property, and we're going to grab the expression. So this will add a new property to our expression object, and we're going to set that property equal to whatever the expression text we know that it has. And now that we've added this new property to the already existing object, we need to rewrite it to the expressions file. So just to make sure, we have our expression file here. We're going to open it to write, and then we're also going to make sure we close it afterwards. And the thing we're going to write to it, .write, is going to be our expression object again. And since we're using JSON, we're going to want to stringify it. So I'll say json.stringify, and we're going to stringify that object. And then lastly, a little bonus, we need to refresh our dropdown. First, I want to make sure this works. So I'll go ahead and run this, hit save, and my expression name will just be test, hit OK. And now nothing should happen, but if we go to our desktop and open up this file, you can see we now have test with our new expression. So now that's saving, we just need to refresh the dropdown. So we're going to create a function called refresh dropdown. And then right below, we're going to define that, refresh dropdown. And first we're going to grab our dropdown and say remove all. This will remove everything from the dropdown, and then we can repopulate it with our object. So then I'm going to call a for loop and say for var I in our expression object. We're going to take our dropdown and add. What we're going to add is an item, and the text for that item is going to be I. Then after we've added all these items, we need to make sure we have our selection set to 0 so that it will be the first item it has added. So now if we run the script, you can see we have all these expressions. Let's go ahead and create a new one. Just say time times 80. And when I save it and call it new test and hit OK, we can now see it's automatically refreshed it in the UI, and we can now select it. You can see it's now saying undefined in here as well. What we need to do is add our update for display text down here after we've selected it. Alright, so now that we can have all of these updated expressions in our file, we now need to be able to apply them to finish it off. So under apply button, we're going to do a few of the same checks. We're going to go ahead and just copy and paste all the way down to selected properties and paste it into the apply button. We're going to make sure they have a comp selected, that's good. We want to make sure they have one layer selected, that's also good. And we also want to make sure they have at least one property. We can do multiple properties in this case, so we'll say is less than 1 rather than is equal to 1. We actually want to support multiple properties to apply expressions to, so we'll say less than 1 rather than is not equal to 1. So and then we'll also say please select at least one property to apply to. Then all we need to do is loop through all of the selected properties. So I'll say var I is equal to 0, and I is less than our app.project.selectedlayers.selectedProperties .length I++ to loop through all of those properties. And for each one, we'll grab the property index I and set the expression equal to our expression text. And the way we get that expression text is refer to our expression object, and we're going to grab our expression array, and the index is going to be our drop-down index. So I'll say dropdown.selection.index and close that out. So now if I go ahead and say maybe bring in a new layer here, bring down the transform controls, select a bunch of properties, and let's go ahead and rerun the script and try and apply it. So now we're actually getting application of our expression from our locker into our script. So that's actually going to do it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Very in-depth tutorial on how to save things into files and retrieve them later. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up button, hit subscribe down below, and the bell icon to be notified of new videos coming out twice weekly. And of course, down below you can check out us on Instagram, check us out on GitHub where you can see the code for this script. And of course, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll see you in the next one.